Are myths real? It can be a difficult question. I wonder, though, if the question that maybe we should be asking is, are myths true? Because not everything can be measured on a material scale. How would you measure honor, love, trustworthiness, courage even? All the heroic values that, in many ways, our civilization depends on. These aren't easy things to measure materialistically. I would say it's those things that are difficult to measure on a material scale. That's exactly what myths are talking about. That's what those old stories are about. The way we use the word myth, we tend to talk about something that we already have decided we don't think is real, in that it never happened in history that we know of, or it's not real in a way that we can define materially. We apply a very materialistic scale generally to the things we try to figure out if they're real or not. Are they true or false? We use the word myth as something that is untrue. Myths are things to be busted. I think there's other ways to use the word myth, because not everything can be measured on a material scale. How would you measure honor, love, trustworthiness, courage even? All the heroic values that, in many ways, our civilization depends on. These aren't easy things to measure materialistically. I would say it's those things that are difficult to measure on a material scale. That's exactly what myths are talking about. That's what those old stories are about. I think in many ways we've allowed ourselves to look at mythology, look at folklore, legends, the stories that our ancestors listened to by the fire. I think we've allowed ourselves to believe that these have become somewhat trivial imaginings of a less sophisticated people than ourselves. I don't think this is the case. I find it very interesting that we, as a people who are very, in some cases, disconnected from the real world, who buy our food in supermarkets, who are spared a lot of the hardship of creating the things that we use every day. I find it interesting that we would think that the people who had a much closer relationship with the reality that they lived in, that somehow the stories that they found interesting, that they found meaningful, could be trivialized. Maybe it's us who should be worried if our stories are becoming trivial. No, I think mythology, folklore, I think these things do hold deep truths. I don't think they're going anywhere either. We keep on circling back around. What do you think our superhero stories are about, if not trying to recapture some part of a lost mythology that once shaped how we saw the world? Why do stories about dragons still capture our imagination? But the materialist might say, but dragons aren't real. It's just fantasy. It's just imagination. Maybe. I've not seen a dragon walking down the street, at least not what we would think of as a dragon. But I've certainly encountered a few people who were dragon-like, I suppose you could say. It's led me to wonder, maybe if there aren't dragons downtown, maybe dragonness is a thing. So maybe if dragonness exists, perhaps we ought to have some stories that help us understand what to do when dragons come knocking. It would be easy to say that what I'm talking about is metaphor, metaphorical truth, that Beowulf is just a metaphor or an example of a heroic type of character. I think in some way we cheapen the stories a little bit by just saying that they're metaphor, by relinquishing any greater significance that they might have. I think that the best of the old stories, they're more describing patterns, patterns of how the world actually works, patterns of how people work, patterns of living and doing, of contending. I think that sometimes we forget that for the ancients, their lives were very difficult, and the stories that they told around their hearth fires, they weren't just for entertainment. I think they were trying to describe a way of living in the world that made sense to them, that resonated with them, that interwove the purpose of their lives with a greater purpose of creation. Otherwise, why endure so much? Why go through so much hardship? Why contend with so many beasts, monsters, foes? What type of stories would you tell if you had to contend with so much in your life? Whether it's the enemy beyond your gates or the winter that could be even more deadlier. Would not your stories perhaps take on a little bit of the mythic? Would they not perhaps describe a way of living that can encompass the totality of your existence, to give you a pattern, a template, a way of participating in a narrative that weaves you in with those around you and weaves you into the greater patterns and struggles that you see going on in the world? I would say myths, they're not false. They're true. Whether we want to call them real, maybe I'll leave that up to you. But I would think next time you get a chance to go back and look at an old story, an old myth, legend, tale. I would say look at it a little bit deeper. Don't just think of it as what people many hundreds of years ago thought up for no reason, or to try to explain events they didn't understand. I don't think that was the purpose behind those stories at all. Maybe if you read them a little bit closer, you can re-enchant a little bit of the real, transform a bit of the mundane to the mythic.